Now, from Wichita's most listened to sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH. This is Sports Daily with Jacob Albracht and Tommy Castor.
Welcome in, everybody, to another edition of Sports Daily. It is Jacob Albracht and Tommy Castor. Jad Chambers manning that IHOP hotline for us. We are ready to roll and get you ready for a big weekend in the sports world. Glad to have you along with us, whether you're listening to us over the air right here on KFH. Maybe you've got us on the Odyssey app. Maybe we're talking to you from the past because you're listening to us on our podcast, which goes up to the Odyssey app each and every day here. We're glad to have you no matter how you tune into the show. Perhaps you're watching us here on our Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter streams. X stream, I should say. We're glad to have you that way as well. It's a good way to go because you can leave your comments right there for us. We'll see them. We'll get to those on the air as well. Glad to be here on this day. It's a big day, a happy day for KU fans, I think. As a big-time transfer portal target lands with the Jayhawks. We'll dig into that a little bit. We'll look elsewhere around the portal. We'll continue to get ready for the NFL draft. The NBA playoffs are underway. The Royals are ready to go back in action again tonight. We got a big weekend of, shocker baseball and softball. Here we go, Tommy. We're in full swing for the spring and leading up to the NFL draft. This is a pretty fun time of the year.
It really is. Happy Friday. Good to be here today and looking forward to jumping right into it today because, you mentioned KU basketball, transfer portal updates, NFL draft preview. So much to talk about. Of course, the Royals begin a big weekend series with the Orioles at home. So a lot to get to on the show. Glad to be here.
We will have a giveaway for you later in the show. We'll give away some HTO tea and coffee, so stay tuned for your opportunity to win those prizes. Tommy, we can start with the Jayhawks because it was, I didn't see this one coming. I'll tell you that much. It's there's a lot to go to with this AJ Store signing, I think. Is it a signing?
Commitment, maybe?
Transfer. Commitment. Yeah, whatever it is, whatever we call these now. Because you and I have both heard, and I think a lot of people have, that there's an Alabama player they're in on, kind of a shooter. They'd already gone to Zeke Mayo. They've already, as far as the starting lineup goes, and they've done other things too. And you're looking like right now you're going to add Zeke Mayo into the starting lineup. Johnny Furphy's sort of in the air. We still don't even have an official decision, by the way, for Hunter Dickinson. But depending on what you think of all the targets, you do still have to replace Kevin McCullough. Zeke Mayo, I think, it comes in as a player they would have needed last year in the starting lineup as a replacement. Now you still have to, in this lineup, replace Kevin McCullough, right? And I think AJ Store, although it's not the same position, they're similarly sized, kind of an explosive athlete. I think this was the move to do that. And I don't know that they're done yet because they could still use a big, but AJ Store comes across, one of the top transfers in the country, out of Wisconsin. Just finished his sophomore season in which he scored almost 17 points a game, 4 rebounds a game. He's a 6'7" guard, so that 2-3 makes sense, sort of like McCullough. Not as good a three-point shooter last year as he was his freshman year, but he's a shooter, right? Like he shot 40% his freshman season. That dipped to 32% last year, but it's in there for him. But a creator too, a great athlete. Again, top 5 type recruit here. I didn't see this coming. I thought Zeke Mayo was going to be the headliner guy of the class, but Store, probably even more so than Mayo, steps right into the starting lineup, which, at the moment would feature, DeJuan Harris, Zeke Mayo, AJ Store, likely KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, and we assume he's back. So it gives them a starter. And then the other pieces they brought in probably become more rotational pieces, which is good, I think, for this team, because that's what I think those guys, you would at least pencil in as anyway.
Yeah, remember they already got a commitment from Riley Kugel from Florida. And I think that he pencils in as probably a bench player, a rotation kind of guy. And I like that. I mean, that was one of the major things that the Jayhawks were lacking last year, was that kind of depth. And so being able to have athleticism off the bench is going to be incredibly important for KU. This AJ Store signing commitment, whatever you want to call it, from the transfer portal, is essential for the Jayhawks because he brings speed. He brings a good shooting touch, and he also is, somebody that can stretch the floor in a way that really I don't think there were any players for that matter with Kansas that were able to do that to that extent last season. And so it's a big signing for them. And this is obviously Bill Self going into the portal and saying, man, we had major deficiencies last year. We're going to do everything that we can with our NIL to go and try to remedy that situation. And that's what he's doing. I saw somebody on social media, and I think it might have been, I don't know if you follow Trilly Donovan or not on social
I've
media
stuff. I need
and
he's funny.
He said, yeah, he's pretty funny, but he did say something, and occasionally it's insightful too. And he said, in today's college basketball world, Bill Self is built for this, because of everything that has happened in the past and transpired with Kansas basketball, the NIL world, the transfer portal, all of that. While a lot of big name legendary coaches aren't able to fit in and maybe they're starting to fade away, Bill Self is built for this, to go after the big time players and to, combined with not only the available resources in NIL, but also with what that program is. It's put together in a really nice way for him to attract really major recruits.
Oh, we've been saying that for years, right? There has, even before the transfer portal, like there hasn't been, to me, like the reason I would take Self over the field is because, and Dan Hurley's getting in the mix here with the style at which he's doing this, but forever Bill Self has always been the best balancer of getting guys to stick with the program for a while and bringing in the blue chip freshmen. Duke, Kentucky, I think, Carolina is probably the most like Bill Self in that way of the nice mixture, but he's always had a nice mixture of bringing guys back. Everyone's going to talk about the transfer portal and how wacky and how crazy and how wild and, all these things. And here Bill Self will sit with very likely 40% of his starting lineup that have been a part of the program now for 4 years. So he still blends that even now, right? DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams are going to be back and are identified, I think, even as recruits, as players that could stay a while, right? And that's important in all this too. You've got to have, now the transfer portal, I don't know if it makes it less important because you're going to have the ability to bring in experience each and every year. The danger with the freshmen is they're freshmen. With the transfer portal, you don't face that same danger anymore. So, but that doesn't mean Self won't adjust. And these are great examples. Like he's bringing in really talented players. They're going to come into an opportunity where somebody on this roster is going to be a Naismith candidate. Now, Hunter Dickinson will be the most obvious if he's back. But, that's just what Kansas does. When was the last year, Tommy, Kansas didn't have a Naismith candidate? Genuinely. And like Kevin McCullough was there before injury last year. He was that guy.
Yeah.
Ochai Agbaji before that. Devontae Graham before that. Frank Mason before that. Like every year. Jalen Wilson, before, mixed in there. Like every year, somebody is going to take that step in this offense. And I think that's why so many of these guys come to Kansas, is for that opportunity.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think that one thing too, and you mentioned Hunter Dickinson, he had a really good year last year. And of course, he's dominant in a lot of different ways. But I think that there were some moments, and I had this moment. I know the fan base had these moments where we're like, man, he could be doing so much more if he just had more firepower around him. Everybody kind of knew that, and especially when Kevin McCullough went down with that injury in the games that he missed in the conference season and then in the tournament, everybody kind of knew that the offense was going to run through Hunter Dickinson. And so the opponents could double him. They could just collapse on him. There was really no outside shooting threat, really consistently. I mean, Johnny Furphy somewhat, but there really wasn't consistent shooting from the outside. And so teams really didn't have to defend the perimeter. They could just collapse on Dickinson. And, there was a lot of pressure on him to carry that offense. He's capable of that, but it's also going to be nice if you've got some people that can help take that pressure off of you. I don't know what the future bets, like, I don't know what the odds are right now on Hunter Dickinson to win the Naismith next year are, because he hasn't even made a decision if he's coming back yet. I think he will.
Right.
But
I can tell you that Kansas to win the title is 11-1 because I put a little scratch on that yesterday.
Depending on, once that becomes official, if there are odds put on Hunter Dickinson to win the Naismith Award next year, I might throw some money on that, because I think
I don't think I'd take
the
it.
biggest, I'm going to tell you though, the biggest beneficiary of AJ Storr coming to Kansas, Zeke Mayo coming to Kansas, if they can land Rylan Griffin, the Alabama transfer who made a visit to Kansas earlier this week, if they can land him as well, the biggest beneficiary of all those signings is Hunter Dickinson, because now you've got outside shooting. You've got, the defense has to stay honest with those guys. They can't collapse on Hunter Dickinson. I think he's going to feast next year.
Well, let me put it this way. I would not take it, because I think there would be a good chance, and there is a good chance, Hunter Dickinson's an even more useful player, a more efficient player, but the gaudy statistics probably aren't going to be there, because they're not going to need to be there. That's not the best thing for this team, right? For him to have just unbelievable shot volumes. They'll still want to run the offense through him like they do all their bigs when they have good bigs. But I don't think that they will need to or want to rely on him in the same ways they had to this year, next year. He's got to have more energy defensively, and maybe taking a little bit of a step back offensively will help him do that. I don't know how that works either, by the way, because we still don't know if Johnny Furphy's gone, although I
think he's gone.
I would tell you that
gone.
This move yesterday is a pretty good indicator that he's gone. So we'll assume he's out. And if KJ Adams and Hunter Dickinson are on the floor together again, that's not good enough defensively.
By the way,
as it stood at the end of last season, because we saw that it wasn't.
Can I jump in real quick as far as Johnny Furphy is concerned? And he's not the only one. It kind of made headlines with Zach Edey in the tournament as well. They've got to figure out a way to let, these foreign players collect NIL dollars as well. Because Zach Edey is Canadian, right? He wasn't able to make any NIL dollars, and he's one of the most visible players, or was one of the most visible players in college basketball. Johnny Furphy, I don't think it necessarily even matters where he goes in the draft. He's going to be making more money in the NBA or even the G League or whatever that looks like than he would be at Kansas for another year, because he can't earn NIL dollars. That is something that needs to be fixed, because, at that point you've got major talent that, they're not going to stay in college because they can't make the kind of money that their teammates are making.
Maybe they'll be able to through collectives in the future. But I'll tell you too, the flip side of that is there is precedent there. They don't have, it's a work visa thing. It's not like it's the same for all, foreign students that aren't American citizens on campus. I don't know how, if you had any good friends or anything. I had a good friend from Japan and a good friend from Mexico in college. The friend from Mexico, I think, has since become at least a dual citizen. But at the time in college, like both of those guys, they couldn't really do anything besides work on campus. Right. Or to, take internships, that kind of stuff that, and if I'm understanding it all correctly, nothing's changed. So like you can take maybe an internship or a job that is related to the field in which you're studying, or you can work on campus. So you can't just go out and sign endorsements. Right. And I think that's the challenge right now. So I think it's more complicated than the NCAA or, somebody say, well, we just want these guys to make more money. Well, you're going to have to change like immigration laws to do that. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know if somehow through collectives you could make that out as a student employee. But again, here comes that dicey situation, right? So I don't know if there's a fix, honestly. And quite frankly, like, that's just a part of it. Like, I think there are bigger fish to fry in solving things.
Get ready then for, because we know there's a lot of foreign talent. Get ready for foreign talent to not play in college, to go straight to the NBA or the G League.
That's
or
what's
whatever.
Happening most of the, it's what's happening most of the time anyway.
And I understand it just might have to be part of it. Well, get ready for stars like Zach Edey to not play in college and not have him be part of college basketball. And that's just something that's probably going to end up happening.
Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, Victor Wembanyama, like those guys didn't come to college anyway. They play pro over across the pond. So the very elite players that's not even in their ballpark anyway. Zach Edey wasn't provided the opportunities in the NBA. Those guys are pros before their college age most of the time. So I think it just is going to have to be what it is. Johnny Furphy's a great example, though, of a guy who wasn't playing at that level, had an opportunity to come find that platform and catapult into the NBA. That same opportunity is not going anywhere. Zach Edey wasn't getting, Zach Edey needed college. He needed this platform to do whatever, and he's still not a high-end prospect. But the other thing about Furphy is, yeah, he's going to make more money next year no matter what in the NBA, but he can make a whole lot more if he comes back and moves up into the draft of the first round. Right now, it's generally considered a weak draft class. If I was Johnny Furphy, and when Paul and I talked about this, I mean, I'm not coming back.
Yeah, no, I'm done. If I'm him, I'm done.
It's a weak draft class. You're projected generally into the first round. If you can get into the first round, I think it's a much easier decision. Now, the difference between 13 and 30 is, you double your money if you get into the lottery from the end of the first round, but it's guaranteed. It's life-changing money. I wouldn't come back if I were him. Now, if you're a day 2 pick and you think in conversations with Bill Self and this staff that you're going to have a big role and you could really elevate your stock, then I think there would be a risk reward to evaluate there. But I think when they bring in AJ Storr, everybody's telling you, like, Furphy's not coming back. And it'd be too hard for him to come back, and we totally get it. So now we just proceed as we're guessing at a few things. We're going to proceed as if Dickinson is coming back and that Furphy is not coming back. Dickinson is still an if, Tommy. I think everybody just thinks it's going to happen. If it didn't, that does change things a little bit.
Don't you think that part of it from Hunter Dickinson, and I wouldn't blame him if this was the case, he's sitting back and just wanting to see what Bill Self does in the portal. Like, who are you surrounding me with next year before I make that ultimate decision, that final decision? I don't blame him for doing that. I mean, I think that all along, I had a feeling he would be coming back, and I still believe that. And I think that with these commitments from the portal, it makes it that much more likely. But why go public with that, ahead of time if you don't exactly know what the roster is going to look like? If I'm him, I'm going to sit back and just say, okay, I want to see who else is there.
Yeah.
I think the fact. And
I don't think you can do that because the rosters, it depends on what he does.
Yeah,
and
but
what Bill Self can do with the roster.
Look, there are clues and signs all over the place, one way or another. I mean, because I remember, and this was a couple weeks ago when we had Paul Mills on the program, and we're talking about transfer portal things, and I remember Coach Mills said, look, these are things that we know about months ahead of time.
Sure.
For the most part, that we're talking about, everybody has an idea. Kansas has not been linked to any big men really in the portal. It's not like they've gone out and had official visits from centers, 5 guys playing the 5. They haven't done that. It's been all about the wings. It's been all about the guards. If they were concerned, if Bill Self thought Hunter Dickinson was leaving, they would be aggressive in that capacity. They haven't done that. Right. Dickinson's coming back.
Yeah, I agree. And financially speaking, it makes a lot of sense. All right, we're going to continue this. We got some comments on this. We'll get into AJ Storr specifically. He has not been on my radar at all before yesterday. Did not think he was a target, anything else. So we'll talk about him. We'll talk about the lineup, the rotation, how that might look for KU when we return. And I'll tell you why, like, everybody's calling this the Avengers and all these things. I'm not sure this is any more or less than what KU did last year in the portal. We'll talk about that when we return on Sports Daily. All right, welcome back, everybody. Sports Daily here on KFH. Glad to be with you. Tommy, so this roster now is coming together. And we look at it, and everyone right now is just like, oh my goodness, they're putting everything together. It's going to be this wild and crazy roster and all of these things. And I'm like, well, it's about the same as it was a year ago. Like, is this class or this group any better to you, any different than what they did a year ago? They've got a handful of 5-star type freshmen mixed in. They have won the portal so far, did that last year with Hunter Dickinson and then Arterio Morris. I think what everyone is forgetting a little bit is that Arterio Morris was a big fish that they landed in the portal. They got a big-time return out of Kevin McCullough, right? It's almost, to me, the same as what they did a year ago. When you think about what they brought in, they were big in the portal with Dickinson and Morris. They had 3 elite-level freshmen coming in. They had all the returners, and they got McCullough to come back. So you go now to this year, and assuming they got Dickinson to come back, right? Now you've landed 2 top 10 portal guys, another role player. You're bringing in 3 really talented freshmen again, and you get the returns again of DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams. It feels to me about equivalent to what they did a year ago. Now, I don't mean that to be like alarmist of like, and that didn't work. No, last year McCullough got hurt. They never saw Arterio Morris play, and they were put and Nick Timberlake, just wasn't really any good. So it is about the same as it was a year ago. I don't want to and last year, by the way, for the record, I thought last year they were going to have like the best team ever. So it didn't work out that way.
Well, so did everybody else. They were preseason number one, with what they did in the portal. I do disagree with you.
And they still may have been if they didn't have the circumstances play themselves out the way they did.
Yeah, I disagree with you, though. I mean, I think that what we've seen in the portal so far this year is ultimately going to be better than what happened last year. Now, I know that the circumstances around what happened last year with Arterio Morris and Kevin McCullough getting injured, like those are all things that you can't predict and that they end up, happening, and it's not good for the Jayhawks. But the major difference, like the major difference between last year in the portal and this year in the portal is that the guys that Bill Self went out and got, they are providing a level of shooting, or should provide a level of shooting, that they didn't get in the portal last year. Arterio Morris was a good shooter. He was a good shooter.
They didn't get it, but they thought they were going to get it, right? If you're talking about Timberlake and Morris,
but I'm talking about, okay, so taking Hunter Dickinson out of that, because Hunter Dickinson is a known commodity, and what he did at Michigan, you brought him over to do the same thing, and that was all proven, right? He was a proven guy. But other than that, I mean, Nick Timberlake, they brought him from Towson. He was a transfer from Towson. And I think that Bill Self and staff crossed their fingers and hoped that his game would convert from Towson to Kansas, and it did not. Okay. And I think that early on, they realized, number one, they were not going to have Arterio Morris because of his situation. And they knew that Nick Timberlake was not going to blossom into this, really effective long-distance shooter. That's why they went and got Johnny Furphy. Remember, Johnny Furphy wasn't a part of that program until really late in the offseason, or maybe even after the season had started. And they rushed him to get to the Jayhawks as quickly as possible, and he did. So I think that they really quickly realized that what they got in the portal was not going to be the end-all be-all for them. This year, it's different. There are more known commodities that they've gotten in to commit to Kansas. Hunter Dickinson was a known commodity last year. I think that Zeke Mayo is a known commodity. AJ Storr is a known commodity. Riley Kugel is maybe the only unproven one, because he didn't really flourish at Florida. And I think that the thought is maybe he can take a step forward. But those 2 other guys are proven, where what they got outside of Dickinson in the portal last year wasn't.
I'll prove myself wrong here. And I only bring this up. It's only because, like, to me, I don't want to discount what they did last year, but Arterio Morris, as good as we thought he would be, and as good as, Bill Self clearly thought he was going to be by the things he was saying, is not nearly as accomplished as AJ Storr, right? Arterio Morris didn't do a ton at Texas. He just had a tremendous amount of upside. AJ Storr scored 18 points a game. Scored 18 points a game last year, right? Zeke Mayo doesn't feel the same as Nick Timberlake. The problem there were about 19 problems that played themselves out with the roster last year, right? Timberlake was brought in to do one thing, and that was to shoot. And then he was forced to be asked to do far more than that, and he just wasn't that level of player. So he was put out of his comfort zone, which sort of put everybody out of their comfort zones. It was like this perfect storm of chaos. So that part of it makes this, I'll say, as exciting, and probably more exciting, because the floor feels a whole lot higher for this group now moving forward. I mean, obviously the roster is dripping with talent. And the thing that you can't really bake in, Furphy was the freshman that stepped up last year. Who's the freshman that might step up this year? right? They have a
Yeah.
bunch of blue chippers coming in. We can't really bank on that. Back in the old days, pre-portal, you would look at the freshman class and be like, okay, this guy's going to be a superstar freshman. And KU's had as many superstar freshmen as any school in the country. In the transfer portal era, the likelihood of superstar freshmen in college basketball is going way, way down, right? It's just not going to happen as often anymore because the best teams are going to be able to get players through the portal. So unless superstar freshmen start going to, Wichita State, they're not going to have the opportunity at these bigger schools. So maybe one of those guys steps up too. You just need one, really, because we don't even pencil any of those guys into a rotation we're all dreaming up, right? Nowhere in these rotations do we even consider the Marco Jackson, Jamari McDowell, the superstar freshmen from last year who are still developing, right? Nor do we consider the freshmen that are coming in, which are highly touted. We're only thinking about this through the players coming in through the portal, which, by the way, is the right way to think about this. But that's the other thing, too. It's the depth part. We don't foresee the things falling apart depth-wise like they did a year ago. That's what makes this far more appetizing to me. DeJuan Harris was being asked to do things he's not comfortable doing. Nick Timberlake was being asked to do things he's not comfortable doing. KJ Adams was being asked to do things he's not comfortable doing. And probably, in reality, Hunter Dickinson was being asked to do things he's not comfortable doing. Like, everybody on the roster last year felt uncomfortable because they just were thrust into this necessity of doing these things. Whereas now you look at it, and if those three returners come back, well, you've already added three competent and capable rotation pieces. That gives you six. And again, we're not even talking about the freshmen yet. Then if they add one more, which we all think that they will, let's say it's the kid out of Alabama. Okay. Now you bring in seven. And now, so all of these freshmen here, you really need one. Between the freshmen and the return of the two sophomores, assuming they're back, you need one of those guys because Bill Self likes to run 8 guys out there. We know that.
Yeah.
He loves an 8-man rotation.
And he leaned on Johnny Furphy a lot last year out of necessity. He was a freshman. At times, he had to lean on Marco Jackson when Kevin McCullough was injured. Yeah. He leaned on Jamari McDowell probably more than he wanted to. Bill Self is notorious for not wanting to lean on freshmen, even if they are highly touted, even if they're highly regarded, McDonald's All-American type guys, until they've proven themselves and it's kind of, gotten into the circle of trust. Bill Self really doesn't lean on them a whole lot. Last year, he had to, probably more than even he was comfortable with. You're talking about like the players being uncomfortable asking to do things that they really aren't used to doing. That was Bill Self too, because there was just such a lack of depth. He had to put Johnny Furphy into the starting lineup. He had to put Marco Jackson at times into the starting lineup. Doesn't mean that they weren't talented and showed flashes, because they did, but in big spots and big moments starting in a game for Kansas, that was kind of the reality. And so I think that that's a huge part of it as well. That depth, I think, will be much better this next season. And that's by design. Rick on our video stream says that, he thinks it's a joke as far as AJ Storr because of the number of teams he's been on, 4 different high schools, 3 different colleges. Look, Rick, I mean, it's the name of the game now. That's the way that it is. I'm not saying that it's right. I'm not saying that it's what we would want, as far as having a player jump from school to school to school, whether we're talking about high school or college. It's just reality now. That's just the way that it is.
You just put yourself in those kids' parents' situation. That's what I always tell people. Like, if you were that kid's parent, what would you do? What would you tell your kid to do? I mean, if your kid, like, honestly, think about that. Put yourself as their parent. And there are very obvious, so I don't know about his high school career. I guess he bounced around. That's the name of the game. Grady Dick played at 2 different high schools, right? So let's say you're the dad of AJ Storr and you start at St. John's. Okay. Nice freshman year. Man, Wisconsin out of the Big Ten comes calling. All right, son. Well, let's look at this a couple of different ways. You have an opportunity now to go play on a bigger stage, bigger platform, better facilities, better training. Maybe you think of them as better coaches. They're also going to pay you X amount of dollars. Let's call it $100,000, right? I have no idea what it is. Let's call it $100,000. And St. John's is, maybe paying you $25,000. 4 times the money, better facilities, higher profile, bigger conference. You know what, son? I think you ought to no, you would tell your kid, we don't get many opportunities like this in life. We got to take it. You go to Wisconsin, you have a great year, 18 points a game. The style of which, and I've read about this now a couple of different times, at which Wisconsin's playing is a little slower. It's the way Wisconsin plays, no big deal. Boy, you could really flourish if you go to an up-tempo offense like Kansas. You could also probably now at least double that money again, probably a lot more than that, if we're being honest about it. You get to go play for a Hall of Fame coach who has as good, if not the best track record of sending guys to the NBA, sending guys prepared to the NBA, right? Not just superstar freshmen, but guys that develop in his program. What would you tell your kid? You would say,
go to where the opportunity is. Go to where the opportunity is.
We're going to go to Kansas. Because you have to think about it like they're professionals, because now they are professionals, right? Not in the sense that they're getting a salary from the schools, but in the sense that they have earning potential, right? They're professionals as basketball players. A guy like AJ Storr's trying to make it to the NBA, A. And B, like, where as a young, like, you will not, when his basketball career is done, he's never going to have the opportunity to make this kind of money in such a short span. None of us get those opportunities. I mean, we've been professionals for 20 years, Tommy. We've never sniffed anything like what these guys will have the opportunity at in 1 year. So what would you tell your kid to do? Of course you tell them to go to Kansas. I mean, it's a no-brainer you go to Kansas. I want to talk about the freshmen. I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but it's really, really interesting when we talk about the freshman's role here. We scratch the surface on that. You're talking, and I'm just looking at the recruits. And, Kansas, top recruit, Flory Badunga, big man, got, big opportunities. They've got some other really high, but
LeBaron Filion is going to be, he's highly touted too.
But he ain't got room on the, he's not got room in the starting lineup. So we'll talk about those roles and what they may still play in all of this when we return. Sports Daily rolling through hour number 1 here, talking about a big day for KU fans landing a big target. We're still watching to see if K-State can do the same. I think that they have a big splash still coming. And we're still waiting on Wichita State to put things together. We'll do it all when we return on Sports Daily.
The commercials are over.
Yo, I haven't got all day.
869-1240.
Time to get busy.
This is Sports Daily on KFH.
Mornings at KFH. Staff enjoys a great cup of coffee from Prairie Fire Coffee. Always appreciate them fueling us up, getting us caffeinated and ready to make it through our day. Shocker baseball broadcast, by the way, available live for free here on KFH and on the Odyssey app. Tune into KFH for Wichita State baseball at ECU at 4:45. Simply download the Odyssey app, search for KFH. You'll have the Shockers tonight at 4:45 is when the game starts at ECU. Big series for the Shocker baseball team. Honestly, as big a series as they have played all season long. We'll get into that potentially in the second hour. We're talking a lot about KU right now. I don't want to cram this part in, Tommy. We're going to go to the top of the hour and we'll continue this conversation. And just as you're out there listening and thinking about this, think about where these freshmen might fit in. It's different when it's Grady Dick, who's arguably the top recruit in the country. It's not like Bill Self won't lean on them because he certainly did with Grady Dick. Think about this with Dick, with Furphy, with the way the two other freshmen played last year, and we'll ponder that. In the meantime, I can't believe it's taken us a full hour to mention this. Tommy, the Rangers and Braves start up a series.
They
today.
do. Yeah, they do. We got to put a little bit of scratch on that game.
We do. So in the spirit of this, so we'll tell you right now that this portion of the program is brought to you by Crestview Country Club. And that's going to provide us an opportunity to have a little skin in this game. Because I'll tell you right now, I have not played golf yet this year. I don't know if you have. I haven't swung a golf club.
I have.
I don't know that I've swung a golf club since probably June of last year, maybe.
It might have been the last time you and I played golf together.
That was the last time I actually played golf, and I'm not sure I've even been to the range since then. But let's say this: we'll put it's it's a 3-game series. I think it's not a 4-game series.
Yeah, tonight, tomorrow night, Sunday.
So there will be no ties. So in a 3-game series, you and I both out at Crestview, in the spirit of Crestview portioning, bringing us this portion of the program. Let's just say whoever wins the series, the loser of the series between our favorite 2 baseball teams, buys the beers at a round of golf.
Deal.
Good.
I'm in.
You got far more on the line here than I do.
Count me in.
Good with that?
That's fine.
Because I'm not a serious golfer. I'm a much more serious beer drinker than I am golfer.
I'm happy to do it. And in fact, I was thinking about it, and I meant to actually reach out to you, I think earlier this week. And I'm going to pose it to you like live on the air. Forgot to do it. I know you've got a crazy schedule. I know you've got kids, and I haven't even checked with my wife about this. So maybe we ought to talk to our wives first. The Sunday night game is ESPN. It's the national broadcast for ESPN on Sunday Night Baseball. You and I ought to get together and watch that game. I don't know what you got going on. I don't know what the family's got going on.
Is it a 6 or a 7 o'clock first? I
think
pitch?
It's a 6 o'clock first pitch, I believe. We can talk about it off air, but throwing it out there.
Yeah.
It's the climax of the series. It'll be the third game, the rubber match. We got to figure out a way to make that happen.
Not a bad idea. We can run up to Crestview and watch it. We'll have to check the schedule there and do that, but that makes it easy. It's easy. Central location. It's the other reason we really like Crestview is because it's close by for us. It's easy to get there. So we'll do that. So that series is happening while we're talking baseball here and got that on the plate because there's not a lot of people out there that give 2 rips about the Braves and the Rangers. Humorous for a second. We do care about the Royals, and they get a big series, Tommy, coming up here with the Orioles, and it's a show me something series. Baltimore took the series. They've already played one. You're getting these games out of your system. But I think if you think about it, if you think the Royals are, real playoff potential type team, which we both do, then this series gives you a better indicator of a potential playoff type series because certainly the Orioles are in that conversation. You're going to have in this series Cole Reagans and Corbin Burns face off, which is a great, there's a lot of little things in here that could give us a real good indication on both of these teams. I think more so because the Orioles obviously proved it last year over the course of a season. But I think more to the Royals, if you can throw your ace against their ace, if you can show you can take down one of these top teams, that's going to go a long way, I think, as far at least as an April 19th game or series can go in really energizing, I think, the clubhouse, the fan base, all of these things. I hope there's a ton of people at these games, and I hope it's a fun atmosphere and environment for the Royals because so far, the product on the field has deserved that. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Well, I think that there is a pretty strong argument that can be made that the Royals of 2024 are wanting to duplicate what the Orioles in 2023 did. I think there are some similarities between these two teams. A lot of similarities. And I think that the Royals are about a year behind, where the Orioles are. And the Orioles made that run to the postseason last year on the backs of really young talent. And that was something that was, I think, really it was refreshing to see from a team like Baltimore. A lot of people got behind them because they were exciting to watch with that young talent, guys like Gunnar Henderson and, the young pitching staff. And then they just completely bolstered their staff, their team, their roster, and especially in the rotation with Corbin Burns, bringing him over. I think the Royals can look at the Orioles from last year and say, all right, this is kind of the direction that we want to go. And I think from the Orioles' point of view, they're out to prove this year that last year was not a fluke. It wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't lightning in a bottle. And so that's, I think, another reason it makes this series for Kansas City. And of course, the series is, at Kauffman this weekend. It makes it that much more important because you're trying to show that you can follow that same path that Baltimore did one season ago.
It's the goal. Yeah, it's a little different. The Orioles have done it through a lot of good young positional players and all these things. But you've got, one of the best young players in baseball, whether you're talking about Bobby Witt Jr. or, Gunnar Henderson or Adley Rutschman. There's a lot of comparables. I don't know what the weather is going to be like in Kansas City, if it's going to be like it is here, which could also, which could obviously kind of put a hindrance on attendance and those kinds of things. But this is as fun an early season series as you'll get. And by the way, you can hear it. You're going to get coverage beginning, we think, probably around 7 o'clock tonight. We'll pick it up after the Wichita State broadcast. Won't be an interference unless you get something crazy on Saturday, as you'll get a 6 o'clock start. And then Sunday, it'll kind of be the same join in progress type of situation with the 1 o'clock start in Baltimore. You can always hear the Royals, by the way, on the Odyssey app. So check that all out. It's a big time weekend for baseball, both for us in our personal wagering, staking lives with our two teams, and then the Royals, who we all are paying attention to and rooting for this year, obviously, to give us a good summer of baseball. When we come back, we'll dig back into this KU situation with, bringing in tons of talented players. Where do the freshmen fit into all of this? That's what I'm having a hard time with, because they got lots of really talented freshmen again. No surprise, no shocker, right? But less room probably than any of the other teams bringing in the quantity of talented freshmen will have. How does Bill Self navigate it? We'll dig into that a little bit when we return. Hour number 2 coming up on Sports Daily. Don't go away.
In Odyssey Sports.
The Wichita State baseball team is on the road this weekend visiting a top 10 team. 9th-ranked East Carolina, two of the top 3 teams in the conference. 5 o'clock today, 3 o'clock tomorrow, noon on Sunday. Mike Kennedy with the call of all those Shocker baseball games right here on 97.5 and 1240 KFH. I'm Ted, the Sports Head.
Now, from Wichita's most listened to sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH. This is Sports Daily with Jacob Albracht and Tommy Castor.
Welcome back, everybody. Sports Daily, hour number 2 here coming your way. We are going to start off things talking more about this KU recruiting situation and how loaded they will appear to be next season. How do they all fit it in? We'll get to that this hour, probably a little more in depth, maybe a little more on the Royals. Plenty to get to. Some of the other headlines around the sports world. The draft now less than a week away. But we've got a giveaway coming for you this hour as well. Some HTO free iced tea and free reign coffee for you. It's all available for you on the IHOP hotline, whether you want to win a contest, talk about what we're talking about, whatever it is. 869-1240 is that IHOP hotline. You can also leave us your comments on our Facebook, our YouTube, and our X channels where you can watch the show. Let's continue the conversation with college basketball, Tommy, as we continue to wait to see if K-State has another big splash coming. I contend that they do. To see how Wichita State's going to piece this together. They're not going to have a big splash, but what can they put together to try to give Paul Mills an opportunity and that coaching staff to win more games next year, which certainly is going to have to happen. But for KU, it's more about, it's not going to ever with KU, as long as Bill Self's there, be about can they get enough? It will become, can they get the right players? And so what becomes interesting is, how do the freshmen fit into this? Right now, KU comes into next year with 24/7's 8th best recruiting class. 3 guys, a 5-star in Flory Badunga, LeBaron Philon, and Rakis Passmore. Different positions. Badunga is a center. Philon is a point guard. At least he's called that now. And Passmore is a shooting guard. You've got a shooting guard, technically speaking, and AJ Storr coming in. You've got a point guard coming in Zeke Mayo. And you've got another point guard in Riley Kugel, who I still can't figure out how fits into all of this stuff. But he's there. So you've got a rotation already for Bill Self that consists of, we think, the 3 big-time returners, right, in DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams and Hunter Dickinson. You've got the 3 transfers coming in that give you 6. And then you have the 2 returning freshmen, at least as far as we know right now, who are both 5-star guys last year. And then you have 3 more elite-level high school prospects, all top 50 players coming in. How on earth are these freshmen ever going to play? It's a good question. I don't know. They didn't play a lot last year. They needed them last year, and they weren't ready. And so they kind of got minutes that way, but they didn't step up to the opportunity. Johnny Furphy did. But I would say this. When a freshman is an unbelievable talent, sometimes they're going to demand minutes, right? Grady Dick, who was a higher end prospect than any of these guys, but Dunga's pretty high end, right? Different position. He's nationally ranked top 10-ish, but still not like Grady Dick, who was the National Player of the Year in high school. But Grady Dick's role wasn't ultimately, I think, what it could have been, in other years. Like, he was asked to do a lot as a freshman, which was come in and hit shots. And he did that, right? I think a lot of people compare Furphy to Dick because they're tall, lanky, white kids. They're both freshmen. They play the same position. They're both pretty good shooters, although Dick was a better shooter and maybe not quite as good an athlete. I don't think that's true, but that's the perception anyway. There's always going to be a role for really talented players with Bill Self. Freshmen, whatever it is. But I do think those opportunities and those minutes are going to be harder to get than ever before, especially at Kansas, right? Because they don't They're not going to build teams based on 5 talented freshmen. He's not going to do that. He's had the opportunity to do that in his entire career. He hasn't done. He's not going to start doing it now with the transfer portal. How do they fit in? It's a good question.
I'm not concerned about it, honestly, because I understand that they're highly touted. There have been many, many, many highly touted freshmen that have entered the Jayhawks program in Bill Self's time as the head coach. And depending on, their ceiling, I suppose, in college, they've been given opportunities at varying levels. But I can maybe count on one hand the number of freshmen under Bill Self that have been tasked with being like the prime guy or the leader of the team, right? Like I can think of, maybe Andrew Wiggins, Joel Embiid, maybe
Josh Jackson.
Well, even Josh Jackson had players around him where, I'm not sure he was expected to be the guy.
He was asked to do a lot.
So I think that, it doesn't happen all that often because that's not really ever been Bill Self's style as head coach.
Totally.
And, I mentioned it in the last hour that I think that he even leaned on Johnny Furphy more than he wanted to in the last year, more than he was comfortable with. I think that he even leaned on Marco Jackson more than he was comfortable with potentially last season when Kevin McCullough went down with the injury. So I think freshmen know that. Bill Self is not John Calipari. It's not bring in a bunch of freshmen that are freakish athletes that are going to be NBA guys and just throw them into the starting rotation, and let them go wild. That's not the way that Bill Self has ever coached freshmen. Grady Dick was put in the starting rotation, I think, from the beginning when he was there. But even then, he wasn't asked to be the guy. Jalen Wilson was the guy when that happened, So I don't have a lot of concerns about that. And you know what? These freshmen, whether you're talking about Flory Badunga or Filion or Passmore, I think they know that. And I think freshmen know that coming into Kansas. You're not probably going to be asked to carry the team. That's not really the way that it's done when you're a freshman at KU.
Badunga will have the best opportunity here of these 3, not just because he's the highest ranked, but because they have a need for Badunga to be a contributor next year. Don't you think? At the big position?
I think so. And that was where, last year, Hunter Dickinson, who'd they have behind him playing? Parker Brown? Come on.
Yeah, who for a little bit was okay. And then and then it kind of, I think that answers my question with it is, they don't have to have it. They've never had to have it, at least in most years. But I think, honestly, it really is going to depend on the player. We didn't know Johnny Furphy was going to step up that way last year. But when they had Grady Dick, it was very clear that he was going to be a big part of the offense. He had to be. I just, there's no question. So they need Badunga with the roster the way it is right now. They're going to need him to do something, because that was a big problem they had a year ago in what it is they were trying to do it. What stuns me more than anything right now is that Jamari McDowell and Marco Jackson are still on this roster. Doesn't that surprise you a little bit?
Not just the two of them. Zach Clements is still on the roster. That surprises me too. Somebody that I think had pretty high expectations coming into KU, redshirted, and
he tried to leave and then came back.
But I think that there's
normal.
I think that there is, just with his size and ability, I think he could be a big contributor at another program, like a smaller program maybe, or
certainly.
He's wanted to stay at KU.
He was a really good player at Sunrise. Yeah, he was a good player. He could, but that almost happened and then it didn't. So I don't know. I don't know what to think about that situation. But I am surprised that those 2 freshmen stick around. I think it's awesome. I hope they do, because if you can get that will probably be, I think, what changes as much as anything else at Kansas. A lot of these 4-year players that have been so good over the years were big time contributors right out of the gate. DeJuan Harris, even KJ Adams. You go back a little further, Devontae Graham. We saw his emergence late in that season. Frank Mason, Perry Ellis, certainly. All of those guys got better over time.
Devon Dotson got better over time.
Pretty quickly, right? I don't think the pace at which they'll do that is as high as it used to be. So maybe as these, instead of, late in a freshman year and a sophomore year, maybe it becomes late in the sophomore year, into the junior year, where we really see these guys begin to thrive.
Yeah.
And that's okay too, if you can get them to stay. And as long as KU has the NIL opportunities to do it, okay, so fine.
I do think that when you're talking about Marco Jackson or Jamari McDowell, that all they have to do, and I don't know if this is their motivation, but all those two guys have to do is look at Ochai Agbaji and Jalen Wilson and look at the steps that both of those players took throughout the course of their career, the jumps, the leaps that they took from their sophomore year to their junior year to their senior year. Both of those guys, if you follow that path, could kind of be on that same sort of trajectory as both Ochai Agbaji and Jalen Wilson. And so I think that's got to be a motivation too. Again, I don't know, what motivations are. And of course, it's probably different nowadays. You get offers for NIL and that sort of thing that can change your motivations real quick. But man, like, I think that that's a path that a lot of players in today's world, probably aren't going down, but I think it still exists.
I don't know. I can't guess at the path for these. That's why that's why they're two of the more fascinating players in all of this. Related to this, Mike called in, didn't want to go on the air, but has a question here. So we'll read it for you. Does Bill Self wait for Johnny Furphy to make his NBA decision or recruit now as if Furphy was going to the NBA? AJ Storr is your answer to that, I think, Mike. AJ Storr is the answer. If they thought Furphy was coming back, we wouldn't, I think, all of a sudden have a recruitment of a player that was on nobody's radar. AJ Storr is coming to Kansas. I think that tells us that Furphy is not coming back. So I don't know that impacts what we're talking about, but Furphy is a freshman, right? And if he came back, he would be the one that you pencil in sort of as, the guy taking those steps. But that's not going to happen, I don't think, I don't think they would have brought in AJ Storr. So, and maybe it does. I guess it could be icing on the cake still. Who knows what happens? He could get into the draft process and they're like, man, you might not go in the first round. And he's like, crap, what do I do? Well, he could come back. Sure. He could come back.
Transfer.
At that point,
he could go somewhere else.
He sure could. And I don't know that, that would be in his best interest, but he could. I think that it would put more pressure on Flory Badunga if he comes back, don't you? Because then if Furphy comes back, how many spots do they still have room right now if Furphy comes back, if they added another player?
I don't
let's say
so.
they add.
I think they're full.
I don't either.
I think they're full. And considering
if Dickinson comes back and they get the Bama kid, they'd be full, right?
And so I think that's probably part of the reason why, not that Bill Self is hoping that Johnny Furphy stays in the draft, but you do get that scholarship spot, and so you're probably recruiting as if he's not coming back.
I mean, I think you have to. And again, they've had these conversations. Bill Self's got a good pulse on these things. He's generally, I think, very honest with his players on what he thinks they should do. Again, like if you're Johnny Furphy's parent, if you're being told you'll be in the first round, you got to go, right? You got to go. I mean, there is some advantage to coming back. The problem is, though, Bill Self can't afford, and he owes it to, the university and what he's tasked to do as a job. You can't wait for Johnny Furphy to be told he's going in the second round or you're not going to have a spot now. Yep. Now, he would have a spot. He's a good enough player that he would have a spot. Don't get me wrong. I'd much rather have Johnny Furphy than the kid out of Alabama, right? Like, let me clarify there. I'm not sure I'd rather have him than AJ Storr. I don't. That's a good question. Would you rather have Johnny Furphy or AJ Storr? That's a really good question.
It's a really good question. Probably.
But I'd rather have him.
I think I'd rather have AJ Storr.
Probably. But Furphy fills a more direct, positional role that McCullough vacates, I think. So I don't know the answer to that. I know I'd rather have him than the Bama kid. So maybe you can wait that long there. I'm not sure. He's not coming back. I mean, he's not. Mike, to answer your question, I don't think he's coming back. So it doesn't really matter. The other freshmen, though, if you've got 6, we named 6, like you can almost be certain that DeJuan Harris, KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, AJ Storr, Zeke Mayo, Riley Kugel, your rotation will start with those 6. Okay. Bill Self likes to get it to 8 by the end of a season. That's 2. Badunga almost has to be one of those guys as the roster currently sits, because he would then fill in as, the KJ Hunter Dickinson relief. That's 7. Now there's 1 spot for meaningful minutes between 2 5-star freshmen that go into their sophomore years and another 2 4-star freshmen. Yet Bill, and people know this, and that's the thing, and he still gets these freshmen to come in. That's what's so strange about it to me, is that even knowing that dilemma, kids still want to come to Kansas. You don't think that matters anymore? You're worried about the transfer portal and all that? To me, if it didn't matter anymore, Bill Self would never get freshmen anymore, because he's clearly now 2 full runs through the transfer portal as it currently exists, values the transfer portal as much as anything else, right? They're bringing in some of the top guys out of the portal every single year here. So where do the freshmen fit in? I have no idea. I think it probably depends on the player. Maybe if player gets thrust into the role because of injury, as Furphy did last year, maybe the roster necessitates contributions like it will next year, most likely for Badunga. I don't think they've got any bigs on their radar to bring in right now. So I think it's case to case. Or maybe they're ultra talented like Grady Dick and very polished coming in, and they just fit into the starting lineup as he did and played a very critical role. I think it just depends on the player as much as the program. It depends on the player.
More than anything, though, out of all of those scenarios that you just listed, it's a better situation than they were in a year ago. Like, it's a good problem to have. I think, to figure out all
they didn't have the problem until they had the injuries.
They had no depth. They had no depth last year at all until the injuries came in. There was nobody that I think Bill Self felt comfortable with really giving those meaningful minutes. It's always better, I think, to have more talent that you have to try to figure out how to manage than having none at all, and you've got to try to piecemeal it together for a remainder of the season.
Let's look at that last year. So last year they had the return of DeJuan Harris, Kevin McCullough, KJ Adams, right? So they had those 3. You bring in Dickinson. That gives you 4. Arterio Morris was going to give you a starting 5. Okay. I think that's fair, right? That was the expectation. Nick Timberlake was going to come in and give you basically a 6, right? And then you had the 4 big-time freshmen coming in. So they're at 6 now with the 3 freshmen coming in. I think it was about the same. Now, it all unraveled, right? It didn't go as well. And certainly, it's not a stretch to say the 6 right now is going to be ahead of what but at the time we all thought Nick Timberlake was going to be fine. I think it's about the same as it was, and depth unraveled on them quickly. And when we hear Bill Self at the end of the season say, I've been thinking about this for a while, how we do this, that's what makes you wonder, I'm not sure that he's going to be comfortable with 6 that they have now and some freshmen and returners.
Nope.
So it is very likely that they still go get 1 more, because right now as it sits, and this was my point, in the last hour, right now as it sits, they're about where they were last year. Now that did not work, right? And they didn't get Arterio Morris, and really they didn't get McCullough because he was hurt a lot of the year. But at this point last year, right, or going into the season, they are right about where they were.
Maybe from a numbers perspective, sure. Like I said before, they are, I think, the skill set, the shooting skill set of who they have is more proven than what it was a year ago. Arterio Morris, again, you can't really,
Nick Timberlake was a very proven shooter.
At Towson.
Right, but he was. So, and remember back to last year. I mean, we've got to be honest with ourselves here. It's hard to not be revisionist because we know how it played itself out with Nick Timberlake. But remember when they brought Nick Timberlake in, we were like, oh, perfect, a great shooter, right? We all, you look over a career and you're like, that dude's been a good shooter for a long time. That's what they need. So in fairness to, evaluating it only at this point, not the way it played out, because obviously it played out poorly on about every front for KU by KU standards last year. It just absolutely unraveled on them in about 4 different ways. So I'm not talking about it then. I'm talking about at this point. We all had them as preseason number 1. They were a heavier favorite than they currently sit going into the season at 11-1 right now. They were a bigger favorite last year when the roster took shape. And they were only at about the same spot on the roster, right? It was 6. It was some freshmen to mix in there and some returners that didn't really play. That's what makes me think they're still going to go get another one. The question becomes, if they go get another one, then at that point, I don't think Johnny Furphy could return unless they force somebody else off the roster. So that answers that question for us. I don't think they're going to force anybody off the roster now. That would have already happened. I want to get crazy optimistic, and I think it's appropriate to, but I thought that last year too, and they were about in the same position. Again, I think the chances of 4 or 5 different things going wrong the way they did last year are about 0. So it's fine. Like, it's good. They're in a good spot. If they started the year right now with exactly what they have, they'll be a top 5 team in the preseason. There's no question. So it's fascinating. This whole process for Kansas specifically, and the teams like Kansas, is fascinating. It's not the same thing at K-State, right? They're still in the position of just trying to acquire as much talent as they can. Kansas has to figure out how to strategic. They know they're going to acquire the talent, right? The talent's coming. Now, which talent do you want? How do you balance it? How do you balance it with the freshmen, the returners, the transfers, and the depth that they didn't have last year? I love it. It to me, this bothers people with the I love it. I think it's fascinating. I think that the construction of rosters right now in college basketball, I think it's fun. I think it's a blast. Maybe that's just me. It probably is. 869-1240. When we come back, we'll go elsewhere in the sports world. How interested in the NBA playoffs are you at this point? We can get into that, and certainly the NFL draft coming soon. It's all happening on Sports Daily. Let's give away some HTO on the way out, Jad. 869-1240. We'll do a free iced tea, one of 25 flavors that you can choose from. You can mix and match, and the flavors are endless. That's Wichita West, Wichita East, and in Derby. That's where that free tea card will work for you. And then you can get some free Rain coffee. It's all new there to the HTO family. You can get a free coffee either in Derby or at HTO Wichita East. Good luck, everybody. 869-1240 on that IHOP hotline. We'll come back. More Sports Daily right after this. right, less than a week away now from the NFL draft's first round, which is where all the drama and attention, of course, go. And then day 2 is also pretty interesting, but that would be where we are, next week. But that first round, man, the Chiefs, Brett Veach talking this morning. The thing that is standing out among the things that he has said so far is that he was asked about moving up in the draft into that top half or so for a non-quarterback. Quote, I can envision myself doing that. I just have to get the owner's approval, he said with a smile. Apparently, I don't think he needs the owner's approval to do anything in the draft. I think that was a joke. I don't know if he was talking about Mahomes or, or Andy Reid or maybe even Clark Hunt. I don't know. But the Chiefs general manager kind of giving some insight today. Something else he said that's interesting that maybe we'll spend a second with, Tommy, is that I'm seeing is sort of talking about a little bit more of a drop in talent because more kids are, guess what, staying in college now with the NIL. Everyone thinks this is all bad. More kids are staying in college longer. Is that bad? No, I think it's great for college sports. Anyway, moving up, I think they're going to. I've thought they were going to for a long time. I don't think it'll be for a receiver, although I guess it could be. I think it'll be for a left tackle. I really do. It's what I thought the whole time. It's what I thought their offseason has told us. The Rashee Rice situation has made that a little more interesting for me. We're also seeing now from Andy Reid and Brett Veach today, there's some Kadarius Toney love from those guys. Still not giving up on the talent there, which I don't know if that tells us anything about their plans at receiver. I'm not sure. But it's happened now between Reid and now, granted, they were asked about him specifically. So to be fair, they were asked about it. It's not like they brought it up on their own. They don't bring anything up on their own. I think, Tommy, I really do. I think they're moving up to take left tackle. And things can change. Teams can move up. That you got to love the player, but strategically, when they brought back Chris Jones, when they didn't do anything at left tackle, they haven't spent money there. It's telling me it's because they want to draft there.
I still think, even if they do draft in the first round, I still think that they will probably sign a veteran to maybe a 1-year deal or something, just as a contingency plan, just to kind of hedge a little bit. That's at least what I would do. There are veterans that are probably not a whole lot of money that are still on the market. Donovan Smith is one of them. I don't think there's anything wrong, even if you do move up and you draft a left tackle in the first round, that maybe will be the centerpiece and the franchise left tackle long term. I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing back a Donovan Smith for a year just to hedge, just in case that development doesn't go the way that you want it to go right away for whoever that draft pick is.
I'll present 2 scenarios to you on that note, because I think if they draft left tackle, Wanya Morris slides back into that role, which he filled last year. Dewan Taylor at right tackle. Would you rather see the Chiefs, however it is they do it, whether they move up or take him at 32, sign Donovan Smith and draft a wide receiver there? Or would you rather see them draft a left tackle and sign a veteran wide receiver that's still on the market? Because I'm not sure they can do all 3
I think
of
you
those
can.
things.
I really think that you can. I think that you've got enough money. I think you've got enough cap room to be able to make that happen.
They got to pay draft picks. Picks.
I understand that. But again, like if they feel good about, the way that the board is falling and they feel like they can trade up and they want to get a cornerstone left tackle, and I don't know exactly what they would be willing to give up to trade up to get that guy. I think you can do that. And there's, a Donovan Smith or a Mekhi Becton or one of these veterans you could get on a short-term deal. I don't think for a whole lot of money, just again, as a backup
anything
plan.
Will have to be a 1-year deal
for
whether
sure.
It's a receiver or a tackle.
But then I think that you could still probably then, if you wanted to, go get a veteran wide receiver for a 1-year deal. That's not going to be a whole lot of money either. Like there are enough of them out there, especially wide receiver, that are veterans that you could throw a 1-year deal at and still have enough cap space to pay your draft picks and to maybe also get a 1-year deal out of a backup left tackle.
I'm going to give you my dream scenario here. It's dream scenario for the Chiefs draft. You get left tackle in round 1, however it is that you need to do that. You sign a free agent wide receiver. if you're able to still have a day 2 pick, you draft a corner, and then I would spend probably another pick or 2 on the offensive line in that middle part of the draft, because they have been so dadgum good drafting offensive linemen in those rounds. And then, yeah, you can add a receiver. You can do that. I mean, look, if they can afford to do all that and bring back Donovan Smith, great. I'm fine with that. I'm just not sure that they can. And I think that they'd be okay if they didn't, as long as they drafted, basically as long as you come out of the draft with 2 tackles and you have Wanya Morris. So that gives you 4 tackles on the roster, right? With Taylor and Morrison. So I think that's my dream scenario. I think you got to get a tackle. You got to get a corner. I don't think you have to get a receiver. I know everybody's there. I think you don't have to do that.
I think you can.
If you do, as long as you do it in free agency.
I think you can get a wide receiver in the draft, but I don't think you need to go even first or second round even.
I don't either.
There are so many wide receivers that are capable that are in the draft class this year. And I think that outside of the top couple, I mean, you look at Marvin Harrison Jr., you look at Roma Dunze, there's a couple of others, that are there. I think after that, then everybody is kind of jumbled up, where I think you can wait until
that's the way most scouts have it, or most evaluators have it.
Day 2 or maybe even day 3 to get your wide receiver that you like, as a rookie. There are also a lot of offensive tackles that are highly touted that are in the draft class. Okay, there's a lot of them. They could slide,
which is why I think the Chiefs are moving up, because they could slide. Because they can take their pick,
right?
If they slide, you take your pick.
But there are also, I think, enough that you maybe don't even have to trade up, and you might like who's there waiting for you at number 32. I mean, There's a couple of top guys. Joe Alt out of Notre Dame is one of them. He's maybe going to be a top 10 pick. I don't think the Chiefs are going to move up into the top 10. They might. I don't know. I mean, he's out there. Here's the kid from Oregon State is a top 15 potential draft pick kind of guy. There's a kid from Washington. There's enough
Penn State. Yep.
Penn State. There's one. Alabama. There's one. There's a lot of offensive tackles that are, could conceivably be first round draft picks, where I don't necessarily know if you would have to trade up. If you really like the guy and he scouts out for it, then you can, but I don't think you have to.
I want them to approach this the way they approached Mahomes. Of course, if they think a guy's going to fall, they'll let him fall. But if they do really like a tackle, based on the history they've given us, again, in the last handful of years at evaluating offensive linemen, which has been outstanding, whether that's through free agency or, more appropriately through the draft, if they like any of those guys that you mentioned, and I mean, they have them like ahead, like clear. This is our clear favorite tackle in the draft class. To hell with it. Go get that guy, right? Maybe they like the other guys too. I just think they're in a position organizationally. They are in a position with history on the line this year. If they really do like one of these guys and they evaluate one that's head and shoulders better than the others, I would go get that player, because I think they can fix wide receiver through free agency, period. It's not even remotely a concern for me, because there's still so many good receivers out there in free agency. This wouldn't even be a conversation if Rashee Rice didn't have a legal situation. They went and they signed Hollywood Brown. Like, they don't, to me, need to solve that in the draft. There are 2 spots they need. I would be totally comfortable if they went all in on if they evaluate a tackle this way, going as high as they need to go to get that guy, and then drafting a corner in round 2 or 3. If that was all they did in this draft, and of course it won't be, I'd be happy, because I think they can still get a receiver. They could get 2 receivers in free agency if they needed to. They can, as you said, they can add depth at tackle that way too. Whenever we're looking at this, and I do think you have to consider now the short term as much as you ever have for any team, because the Chiefs have a chance to do something no team has ever done, and that matters, right? It also matters that you protect Patrick Mahomes. But I think I can't believe how many people want to see the Chiefs go after a wide receiver. And I get it. I remember last year too, everybody. That room now, shorthanded, has been good enough to win 2 straight Super Bowls. Okay. That room added one of the better rookies in the NFL last year in Rashee Rice, who was not going to get suspended for the full season, right? And it also went and added Hollywood Brown, who's really, really good. And they also returned the other 2 that we maybe like don't say their names because everybody's so,
fed up with them.
Fed up with them. But they're still on the roster, right? And they still cost the Chiefs a lot of capital. I just don't see wide receiver on the radar like at all, Tommy. I really don't. I don't know why it's getting so much run because I don't think it makes any sense.
Because
if you're going to sell
high
out
profile.
Well, there are, but they're not
draft-
going to be in a position. They're not going to be in a position for Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, or Rome Odunze. They're not. They shouldn't be. That doesn't make any sense for them. If Marvin Harrison Jr. falls to 32, by all means, take him. But that's not going to happen, right? Like those 3 players will be gone after the first 12 picks or so. What is attainable? One of the top tackles is probably attainable, right? And they just have tried time and time again and failed to permanently fix left tackle, that in a tackle-heavy draft class, in a talented draft class that way, where some of those guys are going to slip out of the top 5 just because everybody wants a quarterback or one of these receivers, this is the perfect year to attack it that way, I think. And then I think you can get a corner on day 2 because that's also important. Look, if they stay pat, if they stand there and sit at 32 and things haven't gone well because they just haven't, and you have a chance to get one of the top corners, do that, right? Don't reach for a receiver. I just don't think that's a need. They're telling us that they got rid of Tyreek Hill and then won 2 Super Bowls. Let's not, because we're all enamored with the pass and Patrick Mahomes. He still has Travis Kelce. He now has Hollywood Brown. He's going to have Rashee Rice for most of the season. Not all of it, but most of it. Let's get that left tackle spot solved here.
But make no mistake about it, even if, and I'm kind of on the fence about it, but even if wide receiver is not a major issue for them to attack in the draft, they're going to take a wide receiver at one point or another in the draft. They're going to. They're going
I'd rather
to.
see him.
It might even be a 5th round pick or so. They will draft a wide receiver because perception is reality. And the narrative is that they need to absolutely improve their wide receiver room. And they have with Hollywood Brown. But now you've got the Rashee Rice situation. And I think that Brett Veach is savvy enough to know that you've got all these draft picks. It's a deep enough draft class from a wide receiver point of view that even if you don't get one early on, if you walk away from that draft and you don't take a wide receiver, even with your last pick that you've got, the narrative is going to be the Chiefs did nothing to improve themselves in the wide receiver room through the draft. And with the Rashee Rice situation hanging over their heads, what are they going to do to help Patrick Mahomes? They will take a wide receiver at one point or another in the draft.
But you're assuming then at that point that there's no chance they bring one in free agency. You know what I mean? Like that'd be if they didn't add anybody else at receiver and they didn't draft a receiver, then I'd be upset too. But I think there's plenty of room to still add receiver through free agency because what you can do is do 1-year small deals. If you're a receiver and the market is cold on you, what would be the best thing you could do? Go play with Patrick Mahomes for a year. Go what it did for Juju.
So Hollywood Brown's
doing. This is a perfect example. It's what Hollywood Brown's doing. So, yeah, I mean, there's Allen Robinson, Tyler Boyd, Hunter Renfrow, like any of these guys. They would thrive in this offense. All very smart players. Like, come on. They'll be fine. Now, if they don't like any of those guys, they can draft a receiver if they want to. But it's so far down my priority list for this team. So far down. Not even probably top 4 positional needs I would put them at. Receiver wouldn't be there. Offensive line, corner, defensive line you can never have enough of. Another offensive lineman probably. And then maybe receiver. Maybe. But I'm just not there on that position early in this draft. If they want to take one late, I don't really care. Because at that point, it's just all about your evaluations. It's coming, folks. It's going to be fun. It's going to be real fun if the Chiefs get involved on a day 1 that's very likely to be absolutely bonkers anyway. Congratulations to Jim for winning our HDO giveaway. We'll come back. More Sports Daily. Tommy's going to go step out and help the earth Our Odyssey family is going to, what are you guys, planting a
We're
tree?
planting a tree at the Sedgwick County Park. So I got to get over there and help them do that. I don't know what I'm going to do. I might just watch.
They're going to put you on the shovel?
I don't know if you want that to happen or not, but I do love the environment. It's the one day, one thing with Odyssey. So Earth Day is on Monday. So I'm going to do my part.
Yay, Earth. We appreciate it. And it is a really cool thing that Odyssey does. And I'm happy to plant trees. I can't be there, but, dig an extra scoop for me while you're there. 869-1240. We'll come back. Sports Daily rolls on this week-ending edition. We'll be back. Welcome back, everybody. Sports Daily here. Jacob Albracht with you the rest of the way. Jad Chambers driving this ship for us. Glad to be with you on this Friday. Man, I am looking forward to this dadgum draft. I love the NFL draft. There was a time in my life I was as much of a draft junkie as anybody on the planet. I could have told you everything about the players all taken probably in the first 4 or 5 rounds back in the day. I went to a school where a lot of guys were drafted in those final rounds, Division II school. It was a powerhouse at the time, so I was locked in then. I am far less now, monitoring all the players, but I love the draft. The event, I think, is one of the modern marvels of sports television, the way that this has been able to be hyped up and everything. And this year is the most exciting, I think, of a draft class we've had in recent memory. I think it's going to be fascinating, right? With the quarterbacks in play, with the high-end receivers, what players slip, what teams are trading. I think there'll be a lot of trades made. I think there'll be a lot of teams ready to move down, quite honestly. And I think all those things present an opportunity for the Chiefs to be aggressive and go get a player if they like them. Trying to predict it is impossible. Trying to say I want them to go get XYZ player, that's not what I do. I'm not evaluating left tackles. What I am evaluating is the strategies of it. And it's if we look back at recent history, the Chiefs have a fantastic recent history of evaluating offensive linemen. So if those same evaluators love a left tackle in this draft, there is not too much to me they could give up or move up to go get that player that I would be upset with. I'd be fine with it because I think what they still need on the roster can be achieved. If they gave up, if they walk out of this draft with 3 players, right? The beauty of it is they've been good evaluators of the 2 biggest positions of need to me coming into this, and that's at tackle. Now, they have not been good evaluators at the pro level. They've been good offensive lineman evaluators at the college level. We'll say that recently. So if they can get that, and if they can get corner in this draft, I don't really care what else they do because I think they can solve, a safety valve at receiver through free agency. They still have a little wiggle room. I'll be fine with it. I'd rather see them trade this year's assets than, let's say, something next year. As far as cost to move up to take a tackle if they love a tackle. I would much rather them see them give up picks now versus next year because I think everything about this team, more than it ever has been, is about the now because you're trying for the three-peat and all of that. At some point, they'll have to sort of retool and rebuild again. So you want them to have the draft capital to do it. But, man, they have got to figure out left tackle. They've got to solve it. You can solve it for years to come if you get this right. It's a class that's considered fairly deep at that position, and it's a draft where you're going to see that position most likely fall because there are at least 4 quarterbacks that everybody's on, maybe 5. There are at least 3 receivers that everybody's on. That's potentially 7-8 picks right there that people are going to be in the market for. That's naturally going to suppress some of these talented linemen down the draft. If you need to go up to 9, 10, 11 to go get that player, do it. This is the year to do it. Now, again, if they, and Tommy mentioned this, maybe they wait because there are so many good ones. If they have a collection of them and they like all of them or they're kind of bunched together, then yeah, you wait it out a little bit. I'm fine with that too, but I don't know how they have these guys ranked. My point is, if they have one of them ranked significantly ahead of the others and they think this guy is going to be a star, do what you did with Patrick Mahomes. You just go get him. They thought Patrick Mahomes was going to be a star. They were very aggressive in that trade when it didn't even seem like they needed to be. They go get him. Boom. Do the same thing at left tackle. If you love that player, go get that player at that position. You can do the same. I mean, I guess you could do. I'd be okay if they did the same at corner. I'm just ready to be done with the rotation of left tackles when Patrick Mahomes is my quarterback. We'll come back. We'll tell you what's on tap this weekend here. We got lots to come broadcast-wise on KFH. We'll get you up to speed when we finish up the week of Sports Daily.
Hey, Wichita, Jim Rome here. Join me weekdays at 11 right here on KFH.
Wichita's most listened to sports radio. 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
All right, that's it for us, everybody. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for watching us on Facebook, on YouTube, on X. Thanks for listening to us here on KFH, maybe on the Odyssey app, maybe from the past as we got it podcasted out. Always appreciate it. We got a big weekend coming up. Lots of Shocker baseball, lots of Royals baseball. 4:45 on the Shockers tonight, 7 o'clock for the Royals, 2:45 on Shocker baseball Saturday, 6 o'clock for the Royals, 11:15 Sunday, 1 o'clock for the Royals. 11:15 is for the Shockers. For Tommy and Jad, I'm Jacob. We'll see you Monday.